Welcome back to the Slanted Attic Experience, the podcast where ideas take shape, conversations spark discovery, and perspectives are explored from every angle. I'm your host, Tyler, and today we are thrilled to bring you a special installment of our new book club series. For episode 24, we'll be delving into George Orwell's seminal work, Animal Farm. Written as an allegorical critique of power and politics, Orwell's novella continues to resonate with readers across generations, offering a timeless lens on corruption, revolution, and human nature. Joining me for this thoughtful discussion are three exceptional voices: Graham, bringing his nuanced perspective, Hunter, with his probing questions and fresh insights, and Luis, whose analytical depth always enriches the conversation. Together, we'll unpack the themes, symbols, and relevance of this enduring classic. Whether you're revisiting Animal Farm or discovering it for the first time, this episode promises to challenge your thinking and deepen your appreciation for Orwell's masterpiece. So sit back, relax, and join us as we navigate the world of Animal Farm. Welcome to episode 24 of the Slanted Attic Experience. Let's dive right in. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Slanted Attic Experience. Today, we're proud to announce a new platform content on this podcast. We're going to be doing the Slanted Attic Book Club. So today we chose a book called Animal Farm. For those of you out there that have not read it, I read it in middle school. I'm sure it's been a widely used and prevalent book in most everybody's lives. It was written in 1943. We have Hunter, Luis, and Graham, as well as myself, Tyler, today to, kind of explain our thoughts and opinions on this historical book. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Graham, our local historian, our resident historian. We use him for all those types of things because he knows pretty much all there is to know about history. But why don't you kind of give us a brief context of the book, and then we'll kind of roll right into it.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So all of us read the book. It's a really good book. I really enjoyed it. Like Tyler, read it in middle school as well. And basically, the author of the book, George Orwell, wanted to write a book that kind of reflected the events of the Russian Revolution. And the book itself is very much an anti-totalitarian book, especially anti-communism. And as you said, was written in 1943, published in England in 1945, right about the time that the World War II was ending, and then was published in the United States in 1946. And so all of the characters in the book have a representation of a person or a group of people in real life during the time of the Russian Revolution, which occurred in 1917. And the Russian Revolution, for historical context, the Bolsheviks or the communists overthrew the Tsar, who was in power at the time, took over the country, um, and created what was known as the Soviet Union. Um, and so this book kind of talks about how this came to be in a sense of a fictional nature, through animals. Um, Kind of an interesting way of doing it,
Mm-hmm.
I would say, because it's not something that you ordinarily see. But I think that's something that was very interesting about it, was the fact that he used animals to portray all of these characters. Um, and they all were on a farm, and this is how things came to be. And yeah, we can go into more about the characters a little bit. I think, um, the plot line itself ties in a lot with what the events that occurred within the Russian Revolution. We can start with, at the beginning of the book, Major, who is represented by Vladimir Lenin. Um, he's the one that at the beginning of the book makes a speech, talks about um, the that one day there would be a revolution. The animals would rise up against the Mr. Jones, the farmer,
Mm-hmm.
would take over the farm and would be able to do everything themselves, basically saying that the humans, the farmers, were the oppressors on the animals, and we're taking all of the resources, all of the food, all of the land. And so this was kind of the calling for a revolution, and then that leads to the rest of the book, where the pigs, who Major was the oldest pig, and the pigs are represented by kind of the oligarchs and the leaders of the new Soviet Union, Russia that came to be um, during that time period.
Yeah. I think it's important to note that all those pigs and animals were disgruntled.
Yeah.
Probably represented what the middle class or middle lower class. You know, they weren't getting fed enough. They were getting whipped all the time, overworked, overstressed. They felt like there was mismanagement going on. So, you know, that all culminated over who knows how long. But yeah, and then Major rose up and gave the speech, as you said. So I thought it was kind of interesting as well how Orwell, you know, uses satirical writing to kind of provide context as well as, you know, explain the faults of each one of these types of governments that he kind of runs through. It's super interesting. I don't know if I had to give it a number out of 10. That's kind of tough. I don't read a whole lot of like historical fiction and, you know, more nonfiction historical rooted books, but I'd have to give it at least an 8 to a 9. That would be where I'm at.
I would agree
I
with
would
an eight
say
or
it's about
nine.
an 8.
I'd say it's like an
I
eight,
think
eight and a
that
half. I think its historical value has a lot of weight to it as well.
yeah, and we can get into all the characters and their representations and stuff more as we go through right here. But that's kind of one of my favorite parts of it is that they use the different animals to like visually and physically represent different types of peoples and groups of things in terms of intelligence levels or physical capabilities, etc. Because they use those like archetypes throughout the story to like re-emphasize certain points that I just learned are reflective of the Russian Revolution.
Yeah, I personally I love these types of books where it's a kind of representation of it, and I think Orwell does a great job of kind of going through, and each of these characters, you know, there's not really any character development in any way, with any of these characters. Most For the most part, the characters kind of stay the same in terms of who they are, and they don't really change throughout the book. Um, and so I think that that kind of goes along with, you know, there are people that change, and you like to see that in stories, but in terms of historical context, I mean, I think a lot of people don't really change in their mindsets, you know, the working class mindset of things, or the upper class mindset of things. You know, when these revolutions happen, the mindsets don't necessarily change, um, in terms of like a person's mentality. The mindset might change in terms of like who they feel that the person that should be ruling over them is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as we've seen, who's ruling over them doesn't really change the matter at all,
Yeah,
right? Everything stays the same. It's just somebody else
Mm-hmm.
becomes in charge and takes power.
yeah. I think that's an important aspect of the
Yeah.
varying intelligence levels because it's we can kind of get into it here. So like the first opening part, right, is old Major. He's one of the pigs. He calls together a meeting on the farm and basically like tells all the animals about this vision or this ideology that he has about like animals are better than humans and we're enslaved and we need to rise up and revolt and like free ourselves from this oppression, more or less. And then 3 days later he dies and some of the other pigs get together because the pigs are the most intelligent of all the animals, and they get together and they write out these what is it, 8 commandments.
Hmm.
And they put them up on the wall in the barn, and they basically um, start enacting his vision to like overthrow the farmer and take control of the farm. But that's kind of my initial point with what Graham was saying, was that they had the foresight to take control right after the revolution, or even before the revolution, and kind of guide it in their direction. So the other animals who might be of the opinion that like things will always be the same, nothing ever changes no matter who's in charge, have that opinion because they weren't in a position to like influence that shift of power and have a say in basically that change. So like, unless, you know, a lot of time passes, like you said, kind of stuff will always happen the same way regardless of who's in power. It's a big theme of like the book.
Right. One, it in a
Yeah.
historical context, that's kind of very similar in terms of how the Russian Revolution started. You could even go back to Karl Marx. Um, there are some people that interpret Major as being Karl Marx as well as Vladimir Lenin. Um, but I think Major in itself just kind of represents that push for revolution itself. Um, Not necessarily uh, representing a single person, but I think he's representing Lenin as kind of the figurehead, because Lenin was, in essence, the figurehead of the revolution. And
Yeah.
then after Lenin dies, there's kind of a lull and a fight, a struggle for power between Trotsky and Stalin, which Stalin eventually ends up winning. Um, and so that's kind of the story of Napoleon and Snowball, where um, I don't know the full historical context behind what happened between Trotsky and Stalin.
Sure.
But in the book itself, it talks about how, you know, Napoleon, whether or not Snowball actually did it, blames Snowball for, I think it was burning the silos, right? Um,
Yeah, and just like blowing up the windmill.
blowing up the windmill. That's what it was. The windmill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but then
Yeah,
it just
yeah.
ends up that every little thing that goes wrong, they blame on Snowball.
Right.
Like it could just be that, oh my god, my egg got crushed, fucking
Mhm.
Snowball.
Yeah.
And then it would also be to the point with the other way with Napoleon, where the cows were like, being gracious to him because the water tastes sweet today, and he's made this possible.
Thank our
And
great Lord Napoleon or
yeah,
whatever his name is.
yeah, and I mean that all just goes back to like the propaganda with Squealer and like the media and like real life.
Mm-hmm.
It's like everyone just believes what they get told, and eventually they brainwash themselves into believing it. You know,
Yeah.
Snowball was discredited by Napoleon and Squealer, and then eventually by the end, people were making like, oh my god, that was a myth. He wasn't like awarded a medal. He made it
Right.
out of love.
That's what I was gonna say too. Is that it all initially started when Snowball won the medal during the revolution? They kicked the farmers out, and
Mhm.
he got shot or got shot at, and they awarded him like the Medal of Honor for the battle, and so
Mhm.
he had the people's favor, and that's when Napoleon started propagandizing and being like, no, he actually sucks. Wait, that's actually Snowball's fault, because he wanted
Right.
to try and
Yeah.
shift the
Yeah.
public opinion towards like,
Yep.
oh wait, Napoleon's the good guy actually.
Right. And a perfect example is the windmill itself, because it was Snowball's original idea. And I forget what plans he drew out, but it was because they taught themselves, the pigs did, to read and write.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they were literate. And that's another shift of, knowledge, information, general intelligence, because they were able to shift the narrative, because all of the animals that were, maybe not taking the initiative to learn how to read and write, or weren't smart enough to do so, they were much more easily swayed because they were writing down things. Most importantly, the Eight Commandments. And then you have them reading the newspapers and writing all kinds of other stuff and creating plans. So these other animals have no choice but to just, abide and accept that this is fact or
Right. And I
reality.
think it's the pigs and the dogs that taught themselves to read and write. I don't think any of the other animals could.
Yeah.
So it's basically all the other animals were relying on the pigs and dogs
Mhm.
to relay all of this information that they had written down. And then that gave the pigs, because they were the ones writing everything, the power then to change the writings as well. And we
Shift
see
the
that,
narrative.
throughout at the end of the book, the commandments itself are completely different than they were at the beginning of the book.
Yeah,
Well, not
because they
completely different,
forgot these
but
three random words.
they were similar, but they changed the
Mhm.
wording in order to make it in their favor.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, since they fed and like housed the dogs, they basically controlled their police force too. So that's why the
Right.
dogs didn't go, wait, why did you change what they wrote?
Mhm.
They didn't even care. They were like, I don't care. I didn't notice it.
But more even so than them feeding and housing the dogs, Napoleon stole their babies right after they were born. So he was able to indoctrinate those dogs and create a
Mhm.
future generation that was extremely loyal to him.
Yeah, it
As
was like 9
his
puppies.
right. Yeah.
And run out Snowball with them.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't even have to win the election. He just ran him out. But the crazy thing, going back to the education, is that they were offered to educate everyone. It's just that nobody but the dogs and the pigs wanted to. So that's why, like, it's like always stated that what's the horse's name? Boxer.
Boxer.
He didn't care about anything but working, so he had his two sayings,
Mhm.
and he only knew like 4 letters. And by the time he wanted to retire, he wanted to learn the other 22. And I think it's like Molly. Is it the cow that's the one that's reading the goat that's reading the commandments whenever people are
Okay.
trying to, like, was like, oh, did we remember it differently? And then they ask, was it Molly? Millie?
Muriel is the
Real.
Muriel.
Muriel.
Yeah, that was the goat.
Yeah, but
Molly was the
regardless,
like horse.
since he
That
was
was
the
the
only one
maid.
that kind of knew how to read, after they got the ability to be able to read taken away,
Mm.
like they didn't take it when it was offered, and then just scoffed at it. And then when Napoleon took over, they could not. Well, it was only for pigs now, because they would still make schools, but only pigs could attend. And now they just
Yeah.
only had to completely rely on the pigs. So it's how, like, the people just kind of also inflict their own,
Yeah.
how do I say it? They punish themselves by not accepting the good when it's come to them, I guess.
Yeah.
Taking the
I
opportunity.
Right.
I wonder if that's
Taking the
reflective
opportunities.
of the real Russian like revolution with like the peasants not being literate, they can't read and write, and the like educated elite running the country doing that have all the say and the power, so they can be like, oh no, that says this, or oh no, that means this, and other people just like can't tell. I mean, would you say it was 1917 when the like real one
Yeah.
happened?
Right.
So like I'm sure that was the majority of the population then.
Yeah, and a lot of the population, I don't think during that time was literate. I don't know the percentage exactly, but
That makes it really
up
interesting in the book.
until up until the mid 1800s in Russia, there was a serfdom. You know, the kind of middle age serfdom idea of like um the feudal system that was still going on in Russia in the 1800s. Like
Yep.
Western Europe, all that had kind of gone towards capitalism, more of, you know, um, free market enterprise and that sort of thing. But in Russia, up until the 18, I think 60s, it was a feudal system. And so the peasants, they didn't really have much power at all. Most of them probably couldn't read or write, didn't have a proper education. And just 2 generations later, that's when the Russian Revolution happened. So
Yeah,
it's
those people
not
are still alive,
right. There's
some
people
of
still
them.
alive from that. And I would also think that there's a large portion of that population because Russia was a primarily agricultural country during that time as well. They didn't switch over to industry until they became the Soviet Union. Um, but it
Yeah.
was a primarily agricultural state, and in an agricultural society, generally there is a high illiteracy rate. Um,
Yep.
that's just across the board with most agricultural societies. It's a you have a higher illiteracy rate than you would in an industrialized society.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different websites here, and it's anywhere from 7 to 38-ish% were literate around the time of 1915 to like 1920. So this is also something extremely interesting that I wanted to bring up. It's called Lickbez, and it was a campaign of eradication of illiteracy in Soviet Russia in the 1920s and 1930s. So maybe one thing leads to another. I think that is a good representation of, what happened there. So they were, dumbing down the dumb and pushing them out the door. I mean, they quite literally killed everybody off who disagreed with the commandments, didn't follow the commandments, and wouldn't abide by the new rules of the government that was in place.
Well, they were just creating like a hierarchy, basically.
Right, and that's exactly
You
what they
know?
did in the Soviet Union. Anybody that disagreed with you, anybody that was against Stalin or against Napoleon, was seen as a threat, and so they were eliminated. Um,
Well, not even that. Even they were even remotely associated with the enemy, which in the book
right,
was Snowball. They were just offed. It was like a complete rule, like a totalitarian. Um, but what else?
Else, there's a lot else.
I thought it was a really interesting transition when the pigs got gradually more and more human-like, representing kind of similar theme what we already mentioned, that like no matter who's in power, the power will corrupt and make you greedy and make you whatever, whether
Mhm.
it's totalitarian or communist or capitalist or whatever kind of theme that was like those people will get in power, will then take power, take advantage of it for themselves, better themselves in their class and their groups and whatever, and then everyone else is kind of screwed. So it was cool to see like the visual transition where they started walking on two legs, and
Yep.
then the very first commandment, which is let's see, it was whatever goes upon two legs is an enemy. um and
Or
then
walks on four or has wings is a
yeah,
friend or something like that,
whatever
because
the
didn't
second
the
one is,
bird
I just
get
had
pissed
it.
off and they're like, we have to include you too or something like
yeah,
that?
so
yeah,
then
yeah,
Sounds
yeah.
whatever
silly.
goes upon four legs or has wings is a friend. What was it changed to though? It was like whatever goes upon two legs is an enemy unless it's a pig, or like they literally just change what it says so that they can walk around in two legs, and then they start wearing clothes, and one of them is they should not wear clothes unless you're a pig, and like they just change all the rules for themselves. They
Right,
move into the farmhouse, they sleep in the beds, they do all that kind of stuff.
or no animal can drink alcohol, and then they change
Mm-hmm.
it to no animal can drink alcohol
You
in
got going to excess.
yeah,
They got too fucked up and were hungover, man. That was kind of funny. I actually
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thought that was
That's why it's such simple visual representations of like mass themes and like archetypes of people and groups, and it's really easily understandable. And I mean, at least the audiobook I listened to is only 3.5 hours. You guys said it didn't take you that long to read, so like I would highly recommend, if you haven't, just to go read it, because even if you don't know anything about the Russian Revolution, which I didn't even know that's what it represented until I was talking to Graham before this recording, but like it's just an easy book to understand and get the picture of like what he's trying to represent, what he's trying to portray.
Yeah.
Orwell does that really well. I mean, we've talked about 1984 bajillion times on this podcast, and I think that's very similar in the way he wrote it to represent large and mass groups of people. One interesting thing I did want to bring up when we were talking about literacy and animals being able to read and write, I thought the raven, was it Moses, was a very interesting character, because I believe he could read and write, but he only associated himself with the group at certain times. And something that we were browsing the internet, looking on Spark Notes and a couple other, book review sites, they suggested that the raven Moses shows how communism uses religion as something to pacify those that are oppressed. So he was spreading news and word of what was it, heaven,
The
sugar
Candy
heaven, or
Man.
what? Yeah, to
yeah,
Molly,
yeah.
who wanted to eat sugar all the time, and he would spread different news to, I think, the hens, to like convince them to continue laying their eggs when
It was
um,
Sugar Candy Mountain.
yeah, Sugar Candy Mountain, when Napoleon, set up the vendor in the human to sell the eggs, so they could generate money to buy equipment for the farm. So, any of you guys notice that? Like, what are your takes on the Raven? I thought that was a very interesting character.
I didn't notice that, but once we read that explanation, because the promise of going Sugar Candy Mountain is obviously heaven. So it explains that like this. Oh, Moses is just faith, and then the name Moses is obviously such a such an obvious like example. But yeah, I think it's just giving them faith so that they can continue living on, and then they just stay in that cycle.
Right. It's almost sorry, it's almost like a false sense of a belief.
Well, not
Um,
even false because what was the name of the horse that escapes and goes to the other farm? She
he doesn't
believes
he
in it.
doesn't escape. He doesn't isn't there the one horse that gets sent away and gets slaughtered?
That's
No, no, no,
Boxer at
no.
the
That's
There's
end.
at the
at the
very
Molly,
beginning
end.
of the
Molly,
story.
the one who likes the
Yeah,
bows in
that's
her
Boxer.
mane.
Yeah, so
Okay.
he's representative of the bourgeois, like the bourgeois. Sorry,
Bourgeoisie.
uh, bourgeoisie. But so yeah, that was what it said for her, was that she like was representative of them because they were overthrown, or the elite, whatever, and they fled the country a few years after the revolution because they like couldn't handle that they weren't in power or weren't worshipped or whatever anymore.
And she was like a show horse that was pretty and wore ribbons and ate sugar cubes, right? She's the embodiment of that specifically.
Right. Well, I
Yeah.
think a lot of that too just kind of shows in terms of like communism how there is no middle class. You know, when you have a
Mm-hmm.
totalitarian society, you don't have a middle class. You have the the poor people, the peasants at the bottom, and then you have the rich upper class oligarchs at the top. And so that's kind of in a totalitarian society, you don't have a middle class. There is no such thing as a middle class. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because if there is a middle class, if you have a group of people that are kind of more independent thinkers, are kind of working class people, but make
Starting podcasts.
enough money to be able to like live well, and you give those
And
people
fight
an
back,
inch of
basically.
power, they can fight back. Exactly.
Yeah.
I thought it was an interesting addition because it was very like minute, the bird and the religion. I kind of picked up on the religious hint because of the like Candy Mountain Heaven thing, but like and thinking about it in relation to like Squealer and the rest of the pigs propaganda, like it was another external vein of like influence that they can utilize and manipulate, and just something they could kind of, yeah, I guess manipulate and take advantage of for people who didn't read or write or couldn't think for themselves. Right? Oh no, that means this, and that's actually this, and oh, this is no, you need to do this way for 30 years, and then you can go there. Like I don't know, just kind of an interesting addition.
I think it also goes to the
Yeah.
fact that communism in itself is anti-religion, um, in terms of like, people are persecuted for their religion, whether it was Judaism, Christianity, Islam, whatever it was, um, because communism becomes the religion. So it's like the religion is the state, like that becomes the new religion in itself, and nothing is above that. Like the state is the highest authority. Um, so I think that's kind
I mean,
of,
that makes sense.
yeah. So I think that's part of it too, in terms of the Raven is representative of um, trying to keep people in this false sense of realism of thinking that things are better than they actually are, and that the
Mm-hmm.
state is so great and so powerful. I mean, you see this in like North Korea, where Kim Jong Un is praised as a god by his people. It's like he is the religion. Like the state of North Korea is the religion to those people,
Mhm.
and it's a forced religion. It's not
Yep.
like a something that you can say no to.
Yeah.
It's like you have to agree to that religion.
Comply or die, man.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that's how they show it too in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, they show a book like that too because they put like Squealer puts a white painting of Napoleon right in front of the Seven Commandments that they've already violated, and then put his song on there as well. And then
Oh, that was something I
obviously
forgot to
later on they
mention for
attribute
the.
anything good that happens toward him.
Right. So essentially, like laying praise on him, like you would, you know, your God almost. It's like
Yeah.
That
it
was
is
something
a
I forgot to
religion,
mention
right?
for the old major meeting at the very beginning. They taught him the Beasts of England song, which was used as like an anthem, sang in the
Yep.
fields while they worked, that kind of thing. It inspired the revolution. And then the pigs slowly reworded it and banned it eventually and turned it into a different song that meant something completely different. And people were like, wait, didn't it used to be this? And they were
Yeah.
like, no, of course not. Why would it ever do that? And so that was what you were saying. They changed the whole song that people sang and all that stuff. They propagandized everything. And that was another thing I wanted to ask Graham. Actually, they did this in Russia in real life, right? With how Squealer walked around and would always tell them, "Oh, well, this year's harvest is 300% more than last year, and next year's is 600% more than that one." And it's like they just made up all these numbers and made everything bigger and better every year, even though it was
Yeah.
completely like declining.
Yeah.
False.
No,
And
100%.
he would
I
put
mean,
sand in the barrels and just the grain on top to make it look like they were doing well.
To look full and way more. Yeah, that's crazy.
right. And that's exactly what they did in the Soviet Union because I mean there were millions upon millions of people that died from starvation in the Soviet Union. Um, and that's a perfect example of that
Mhm.
where they don't they were lying to their people about having enough food, having a supply of food, and they weren't able to produce enough themselves to be able to provide for their people. And um, there's I think there's things that could have been done just like any society.
Sure.
You could say the same thing where because there wasn't any issues. They didn't talk about like specifically the animals starving or anything like that. There wasn't any of that. The animals lived fairly well in terms of like having at least enough food. But one thing that was made clear was that the
Yeah.
pigs were getting a majority of the food and of the alcohol and of the excess things.
I do I was gonna say I do think towards the end they do discuss the fact that it's more rationed than it had been ever before. I think a
Right.
couple of the animals talk towards the end and are like reminiscent upon when they first had the revolution and were like, well, wait a minute, like we had plenty of extra apples, which were considered a huge delicacy, in this time. We each had 2 apples per person and a jug of milk, and milk was now allocated directly to the pigs. So I think there were a lot of
Mhm.
juxtaposed events that had occurred to very much note that. But you're right. I don't think any of them explicitly knew that they were getting extremely malnourished or
It's
maltreated.
because it was gradual. They couldn't perceive
Yes.
it, but
Right.
they definitely every time something happened, they were like, "Didn't it used to be different?" And then other animals were like, "No, you're crazy," and some were like, "No, it doesn't matter what. Anyways, this is how it is now," and like they just moved on and gave up.
I was going to say it all led up to the peak of where Napoleon decides to sell the eggs and provides this human who, they were trained to hate and distrust and to never, do business with. And Napoleon brings this guy in to barter in between the different farms and to sell his eggs at the market so they can fund what they're trying to do at the farm. And the hens, end up rebelling, right? And Napoleon goes ham and just murders like half of them, and I think that's when the very point where the rest of the animals realize that, oh shit, he is quote unquote like a supreme ruler, and his way or the highway type of deal. Before that, I think they were more indoctrinated, even after the fact of the whole Snowball thing. And when Mr. Jones comes back and they chase off Snowball, I think that was, a tipping point, a turning point, but I don't think they fully realized, as a group that it was, all the pigs until the hen and the egg thing happened. And then it was full on trading with different farms, building up, getting heavy machinery, tilling the fields with new stuff, all kinds of crazy shit. I think that set it off.
Yeah. And how they were working so much. They felt like they were working more and getting a little more than they were before, but they were slowly being deducted little by little until they were all starving again. And then to the point where the promised pensions at the end, at the retirement age, is like honestly just a myth. It's same thing. Sure, can't even.
Didn't one person reach retirement age, and wasn't it Boxer? And they promised him like a pasture to graze and like daisies and sunflowers and all this stuff. Come to find out, they already used that to till the land, and
Yep.
then what was it? Something specific, some grain specific to alcohol. I think barley, maybe.
Yeah,
I think
and we're
that's
selling it. They were selling a lot of the stuff, like you said. They took all the milk. They were selling it because they were trying to. I think that notion, at least what I took from it, was like how communism doesn't work, right? It's like you have to be capitalist and participate in the market, or else you won't be sustainable, kind of deal. And so that's at least how I like perceive that the pigs taking all the
They
stuff
were
for
also
themselves.
using all of the barley and making their own alcohol, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
But
drinking
Yeah.
it.
selling it.
Right. Well, and they were selling it to the farmers that were formerly seen as their enemies.
right. And they were pitched as their enemies the entire time.
Enemies. And they were also drinking the pig for one day, and then Napoleon was drinking like a whole gallon to himself, like every day. So then they accept the excess they were taking, and then not distributing it equally, supposedly. But
Supposedly.
Yeah.
supposedly, yeah. I mean, by the end, it's only the long living animal. And I think by that time, it's just like Sebastian, because Mario had died.
Benjamin. I think Benjamin, right?
And yeah,
The donkey.
is it Benjamin?
Yeah, he's the donkey
It's donkey. That's what I was
Yep.
thinking.
that
Yes,
never
it's
took,
Sebastian.
to the whole concept, right?
Oh, and
he
yeah, I
was
guess
the
Moses.
one, right? He was the only one, other than Moses, I guess, who was an independent variable, an independent character, and the cat. I guess I forgot about the cat. I feel like that's easy to surpass the cat. I almost forgot.
That's true.
But the donkey Benjamin was pretty much the only one that like kept quiet and silently protested the whole bit
Until Boxer's death.
Which is kind of ironic because when you think of animals, you don't think of donkeys as necessarily the most intelligent animal or the one that's the one that would be
Long
able to
living.
that would be able to recognize it. But I think the idea of using a donkey is that the donkey's the oldest, like you said, that donkeys live a long time. They're wise.
He remembers.
They remember things. They aren't necessarily swayed by other animals as much, and so that's kind of the idea. And the problem with that Benjamin has throughout this whole book is that he doesn't feel safe or in any way comfortable with speaking out against this. And so this is kind of this idea where the people that would speak out against it are afraid to, and they don't feel like they can because of what happened to Snowball. And then they're gonna, like, if he would have said something, it was likely that, oh, well, he was working with Snowball. They would have just said that, and then they could immediately disregard him um and what he has to say by just saying that. And that would be all that they would need to do.
Yep.
Um
And everybody would believe it.
right, right.
All right, so we were talking about Benjamin, the donkey, who was long-lived, wise, and pretty much the only animal to ever, you know, not necessarily conspire against the government per se, but to keep a strong opinion over the course of however many years the book was, set in, and he continued that, until Boxer's death, where Boxer, was this strong, loyal workhorse, basically single-handedly built the windmill, and they're quick to just sell him off to the glue factory, the guy that's taking him to his death. And they're trying to
Yeah,
bargain with these horses, bro. The horses that are taking the cart. They're like, you guys don't know what you're doing. You're literally taking him to get brutally butchered and sold. And they don't hear any of it because they're another illiterate member of that group, and they don't know any better, right? That's
well, the pigs also directly tell him like, "Oh no, the vets actually bought this truck from them, and they haven't
right.
repainted it yet, and blah blah blah." And they make up a bunch of stuff at every turn until
Right,
he's out the driveway and they can't catch the van.
right. And it's Benjamin is the only one that says something about it,
Yeah.
and tries to warn the other animals, and the other animals are just like, nah, it's no big deal.
Like, no, we trust our supreme leader, Napoleon.
Yeah.
Well, I think when Benjamin says something is when they start like brainwashing them and saying that the the vet just bought that truck. But
They come up with some
regardless, it's
stuff.
just another example of like the constant brainwashing that they're always doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this book it not only is like a example of totalitarianism, but I think it is an example as well of how not just, in this context, animals, but humans can easily be brainwashed
Yeah.
through propaganda and um, through laws, right? I mean, we see this in our country as well, where um, laws are specifically changed and worded in certain ways to mean certain things, and there's you know interpretation of law because the laws in themselves can be interpreted to be able to make them mean what a person wants them to mean. um, and so the wording is very important, and the way that the pigs used words to kind of change how things were, how the laws were, and how things were run, and in the farm itself is a perfect example of that, of just you know over time. And it's not something that happens immediately, it's gradual, but it's
Yep.
little by little. And then by the time 10-15 years happens, that little gradual change has turned into something that's an exorbitant change that can no longer be, you can't get rid of that change anymore. That's there, and there's no way to, the time to have gotten rid of it would have been at the beginning,
Right.
and to have prevented it from happening altogether.
Yeah.
But the all of the pigs who worked together to create that society that they wanted were able to manipulate
Or
the
get ahead of
people
it.
to get ahead of it. Exactly. um and I think, in terms of, like, I think I don't necessarily think that there is a uh, example that you could portray to a country now necessarily. But I think that in terms of totalitarianism in itself, it's a perfect example because even with Nazi Germany, something similar happened in Nazi Germany where Hitler took power and the majority of the people were impoverished and were stricken by World War I and didn't have anywhere to go and were looking for someone to be the voice for them. And so and that's in every society, right? People look to someone else to be able to save them from the atrocities that they're going through or the bad things that are happening. People want someone to save them from these things. They're looking for that in a way.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep, yep.
and I think that leads to that totalitarianism, this idea that somebody can come in and fix all of these things that are wrong and that, you know, they can fix them and everything will be right and everything will be better and we'll live in a utopian society and um,
Yeah,
all of
yeah,
that. I mean, it's a representation not only of the Russian Revolution but of, history in itself of working class people who are just kind of looking towards somebody else to help save them and do and be the leader for them.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna say that's kind of how I interpreted it because, like I said, I didn't realize it was actually the Russian Revolution until you were telling us about that before we started recording. But just in general, it's reflective of like lots of cultures and countries and histories, a lot of places because of the overarching types and like human themes and behaviors throughout it, which is why I thought it was really fascinating and like just an interesting story.
Yeah, I was gonna tie it to human behavior and like cult-like figurines. I thought we could also tie it to something like that, like cultural phenomena, not only historical context and historical events that have passed. I mean, the most prevalent that when Graham was conceptualizing that to me was probably Charles Manson and his whole cult-like
Mm-hmm.
status in I think it was like New Mexico or Southern California or somewhere out west. Um, but I think that can be attributed to something like that as well. It's a lot of lost people that are looking to band together and achieve some sort of greater consciousness or greater happiness or fulfill some something in their life. And I think a lot of people are looking for that, not only those oppressed in what was it 1910 to 1916 when the Russian Revolution was brewing. I think that's a human trait, kind of like Hunter was saying. We like to live in tribes. We don't do well alone. We do much better with companionship, having somebody else around. And I think it's that human nature that finds us drawn to powerful political figures, that seem to have an answer for every question that you ask them, type of deal.
Is cult short for
Yeah.
culture,
That's a good question. I don't know.
or is that
But
where it's derived from? Interesting. Sorry, go ahead. I just thought of that while you were saying that.
Term cult first appeared in English in 1617, derived from the French culte, meaning worship, which in turn originated from the Latin word cultus, meaning care, cultivation, worship.
mm,
Interesting.
So in a way, communism is a cult.
Right.
yeah.
Everything is if you categorize it like
I
that. It's
mean,
just a group of
yeah, I
people with
guess,
an
yeah,
ideology.
that's true.
That's why I refer to organized religion as such.
Well, and
Same thing, just on a
I
mass
don't
scale.
necessarily think you can say that capitalism is a cult. Like if you're talking about a capitalist society, everyone has freedom of choice
But you
And
can
so
still get
There's certain
cults in
like
capitalistic
sects
you can
of
have
societies.
cults
capitalists.
in capitalist society, but I don't think capitalist society in itself is a cult.
Really? I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of objectify us to worshiping money.
Well, that's different. I don't think, because capitalism in itself is free market.
Sure. Yeah.
It's free trade. It's not necessarily like like all societies have money, so I don't necessarily think it's
Yeah, but
that.
in that thread or theme, I think because it's an ideology, it can be or have a cult-ish following
I
potential,
mean,
even if it
No,
really isn't now.
it does. I feel like
Yeah.
that's how pyramid schemes are started.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of that stuff.
It
Any
depends
scale.
on how you break it down.
But
Yeah.
I think
Monopolies.
capitalism, the ideology in itself, isn't a cult.
Yeah.
Whereas I think you could
I agree.
argue that communism, the ideology itself, is in a way cultish.
Based
Yeah.
on like following a state or following a leader.
Right.
I could see that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I don't know. I am passionate about, our as a culture in the United States, our worship or objectification of monetary value of the US dollar,
Mhm.
of all of that stuff. So, I want to say that, but I think I do agree with Graham. I think there are a few things that communism does pose just outside of that. I don't know, the worship type,
Right. When I think
Yeah.
you could consider like hedge funds or like big money firms or banks, in a way, those are cults.
Would that be a
But I
capitalist
think you're
cult
right. That's
because
like
they're
a
worshiping
Yeah,
the
that's like
market?
a capitalist cult in a way, because
yeah.
it's like,
They're
or
following the market.
even a corporation. I mean, let's be
Yeah.
honest.
So
Like
they
you
have
have
rules, they
to,
have members and in group, out group.
Pharmaceutical industry.
What it
Yep.
really is not cult's not necessarily the right base term, but it really is tribalism in every
Yeah.
aspect. Do you
Yeah.
But I
Android,
think it goes back
iPhone?
to what Graham said. It's not really the capitalism is the full. It's it can derive a cult.
Oh yeah, but
Exactly.
that's
Just
any
Exactly.
like the pyramid scheme. That
ideology.
was that's why that was my first example because
Yeah.
Sure.
it's obviously a cult, but because of free market, it's possible.
Yeah, dude.
It's a cult that sells things to make money.
Yes, everybody wants other people to share their same opinion.
Yeah.
It's that simple. There's certain people that are much better at exemplifying it and speaking towards others and convincing them, than other people. But I
Yeah.
think everybody shares that in common.
Well, not even that, dude. People nowadays with social media will hack other people's accounts and spread their freaking web.
Their
And
lives
then
and shit.
and that's how they steal people's information as well. It's not just about like
Well, it's a
getting their
network,
money.
and
Yeah.
that again boils down to like tribalism because it's in group, out group. At this point it's a global tribe, and we're all connected to thousands of people instead of hundreds or tens of people, but like it's all the same, like it boils down to like our human animal behaviors, which I think Animal Farm is a great representation of that because they use literal animals to depict dumb people and smart people and this and that in different groups. The strong ones are the horses, obviously, but obviously it's representative of the working class of humans. But the whole point is like they're human traits and behaviors that like blanket our history and cause us to repeat mistakes and do things again and again, no matter who's in charge or what they decide to do, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And it kind of goes back to like in Animal Farm with Boxer, the working man's mindset of, what was his saying? Napoleon is always right.
And I will work harder.
And I will work harder. Those were his two sayings, where it was, this idea of, Napoleon as kind of the savior in this, community, and that things will continue to get better. And if I work harder, I things will get better. and that
Yeah.
hard work is the motivating factor. Um, and when in reality it's not, you know.
Yeah, and that too, it once you get the working class under your vision, then the rest just follow. Because
Right.
that's what happened in that's what happened. Once people would get inspired by Boxer and his sayings, now he kept working harder, and I mean, by the end, it killed him, and then nothing changed regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And he was the prime factor behind half of their shit that got built. I mean, half of their
Yeah.
improvements were directly impacted by him, and that, that represents the working class because they probably build or directly contribute to 60, 70, 80% of, the roads that are being built in your town or a new building that's going up or, the intricacies of local government, right? And all these small time working class things. I guess maybe not local government, but like all the demanding blue collar type of stuff, they really do drive and force that kind of thing, to its fullest extent. And the people at the top who are the managers or the schemers of everything, right? They don't have to do shit, but they get rewarded the most because they're held to the highest standard, and they're presented as leadership or a savior, as Graham put it, or even a god. I mean, I feel like some of the animals even were close to worshiping the other animals as like such a figurehead, kind of like you brought up earlier with North Korea. It's a crazy thing to conceptualize, but like Hunter said, it was awesome that he did use animals literally, and I think that really distinguished between the different characteristics and made it extremely easy to follow at a low knowledge base, right? You don't have to be a genius or know a ton of historical context to understand the implications of, different people and propaganda and how misinformation and information is spread throughout a population. So
Right. I mean, we read this in grade school, I think
yeah,
Yeah.
it was ninth grade when I read it. So I was like 14 at the time. I mean, you could understand it even at that age and be able to comprehend it, at least to a certain degree. I
right.
think that maybe the understanding of it in terms of a historical context would come later, but in terms of the
Morality.
overall morality concepts of it, um, I think they're fairly easy to understand. Um, just in terms of, you know, the pigs are obviously the hierarchy of society, and they're taking advantage of the rest of the animals.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of a framework of society as a whole
Mm-hmm.
in every country, where you have a group of people in the upper class that take advantage of the people in the lower class. And I think
Agreed.
Yep.
one thing too, in terms of the intelligence factor, I think one of the reasons why he used animals specifically was because animals do have different intelligences and
Yeah,
different
they're limited.
characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
Humans themselves don't necessarily have those different characteristics in some ways, but what he was able to do was like basically like put it in a way where each animal, represented a group or a person, and that person, might not be educated. So it's
Right.
not that they're dumb, it's just that they can't read or write. They never got that education, and so they were never able to learn to the degree that someone else who grew up in an upper class family,
Right.
who was uh you know had no money problems growing up, was automatically put into high society, and
Yep.
that sort of thing. So I think, in a way, by using animals, he's not disparaging the people by saying that the people themselves are dumb, they're stupid, they're unintelligent, but
Right.
saying that that's kind of the way it was because of, like I mentioned before, how Russia was an agricultural society. And I think you said what, 30% of people
It
were
was
literate?
anywhere from 9 to 30%. They don't know an exact estimate.
Were literate, right?
Yes, yes.
So that's 70% of the population was illiterate.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, yep. And while we're on the concept of characters, why don't we just run through the list? Maybe note anything interesting that you guys saw, just so we can get that out there, just to kind of, remind or, teach everybody who each one of these characters are. So, Graham, why don't you do the honors, since you could probably speak on a bunch of these characters a little more than I can. I do know who Joseph Stalin is, but probably not as much as context as Graham. So we'll let him do the honors if he doesn't mind.
Yes, sure. So, um, obviously Napoleon represents Stalin as kind of the communist dictator during that time, and then Snowball is Representative Leon Trotsky, who um, was one of the main leaders during the Russian Revolution. And in fact, after Lenin died, it was kind of thought that he was the one that was going to take over. Um,
I didn't know that.
yeah, and so because it was really Lenin and Trotsky that kind of led this Russian Revolution, and of course Lenin was more of the figurehead. Trotsky a little bit more behind the scenes, I think. And an interesting story. Trotsky, so he actually um, like was in the United States for a period and was being trained in the United States, like through communism. Like he was being trained to become a Bolshevik, a communist, um, in the United States. I think in like 1914 he made a visit. Um, and so, like, this communist idea itself didn't necessarily come from Russia. It came from the outside and then was brought into Russia through Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. Um, so those are kind of the two main figures, and then obviously Stalin comes into power after Lenin dies and kind of overtakes Trotsky for that, main dictatorship role. And then you have Squealer, who is my least favorite character in this book
Yeah, he
by
pisses me off.
far. Um, so he represents kind of the press and the propaganda and um, being able to sway the words of the pigs in order to, and so it's kind of the same way that the press in Russia or the Soviet Union used uh, their kind of the words to manipulate the populace into believing certain things. uh, and there's a lot of power behind propaganda.
Oh
And we
yeah.
see it in American society as well. Just the ultimate power of propaganda and being able to sway people's opinions um, is very important. And then you also have obviously Boxer, who represents the working class. We've kind of talked about that, where he's a representation of kind of the the people that are wanting to do everything for their country and think that they are doing the right thing, um, but at the end of the day are getting screwed over. Um, and they're doing most of the work, they're providing most of the labor, but aren't getting anything in return for that, except for maybe just a little bit. Um, and then you have Major, obviously. We talked about him a little bit in terms of his historic representation of kind of the guy that's calling for the revolution, um, in a way that's leading up towards this. And then, some of the more smaller characters, obviously Moses, we talked about, the raven, Benjamin the donkey, who's against the rebellion, um, Mr. Jones, who is the farmer that the animals overthrow him. Mr. Jones in this is representative of Tsar Nicholas, who was the czar that was overthrown at that time. His entire family was killed. Um, Interesting thing to note about Russia um, during that time. So obviously, this was during the time of World War One, and so um, part of the cause for this revolution was the war itself. Um, and most of the population didn't want to go to war, and so it was kind of this uh, idea of they wanted to overthrow the government already. The people had this mindset of wanting to get rid of the czar already, and then that's when Lenin, Trotsky, these guys come in and kind of take over that movement and lead it in the direction that they want to lead it in. So that's one thing to note too. The Russian Revolution didn't necessarily start as a communist revolution. It started kind of as a uh, uprising from the majority population of people, and then kind of in 1917 was overtaken by the Bolsheviks, and they kind of took control of the revolution and steered it in the direction that they wanted to.
Yep.
So that's a little bit of history note in there. And then, some of the more smaller characters, Clover, who's the female cart horse, um, you know, she's kind of representative a little bit of like, you know, this group of people that can kind of be uh, twisted and turned in a way by giving them, the candy and all this type of stuff.
Right.
Kind of representative a little bit of, uh, just somebody that can easily be taken advantage of.
Right. And yeah, and doesn't the goat read the commandments to her all the time because she can't read, so she
Right,
has to trust in what the goat reads off the
right,
side of the barn, which has been already manipulated a few times by the pigs.
right. And then you have Molly, who kind of represents the bourgeoisie because she left the farm. So it kind of represents that group of people that fled after the revolution, um, more of the kind of pro-capitalist middle class. Because, as I said before, in communism, there is no such thing as a middle class, really. Um, and so that was kind of taken away. So it kind of represents, you know, the middle class fleeing, but also in itself the middle class dying, um,
Sure.
because those jobs for the middle class were kind of taken and absolved and all put under state control.
Right. There's
So
nobody left to represent the middle class after she left.
right,
So yeah, everything was absorbed by the rest of the Communist Party, the movement, the people, and they just picked up the extra work. And that's shown explicitly in the example after Snowball dies, right? They kill a quarter of the farm and they have to pick up the extra tasks and still produce 300% as much grain every year, right?
hmm
While in reality, they're probably just scraping by to produce the same amount as before. Um, and that just shows, Squealer's importance in the book. As much as he sucks, he's got to be one of the most influential characters that's not like a main protagonist antagonist type.
I think he is the most influential character in this book.
Right.
Personally, I think he is.
No, absolutely.
I think he's more influential than Napoleon, more influential than Boxer. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
because he's the one that, like, tells everyone exactly what to think.
exactly.
Yeah, he's the, oh, you think he puts it, you think I'm lying? Just go check the commandments. Oh.
Oh shit!
Yeah,
Definitely didn't go paint some shit overnight.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was funny. It was funny how they manipulated those too, because it was never outright, because that would have justified the oppressed animal population in thinking that they were actually doing something wrong. Instead, they only changed the verbiage or one or two words at the end or in the middle of the statement, just as to not throw off, that population just enough. They tweaked it just enough for them to not notice.
Mhm.
That's applicable to a lot of historical societies and the societies we live in today.
Yeah.
The media and
Well,
government.
until the end, until they made all the rules just apply only to help them, the pigs.
Exactly. And by that time, nobody even knew what the original rules were.
right.
Yeah.
Because nobody could read or write to remember them except for the pigs and dogs.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. Okay. So we've been talking for quite some time, and I think we should wrap it up with some closing remarks. I think we should go around everybody, kind of give your overall take, something, you really took away from the book, why you think it is or isn't important for members of our society or even other, people around the world to read this book. I know the outreach of our podcast is reaching Australia and like Antarctica and all that stuff. So,
Fuck yeah.
those people are out
Shout
there
out
hearing this.
Antarctica listeners out there.
That's right. So yeah, we'll start with Luis, and then we'll go Hunter, Graham, and then I'll wrap it up with some closing remarks. We appreciate everybody who's made it this far. Those of you that have, yeah, man, drop some books in the comments that you'd like to see us listen to or read in the future. We'd be happy to take that suggestion. I think we already have like 50 on the book list, so it's going to be a hard time, picking which one's next. So yeah, why don't we wrap it up here, Luis? All on you, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a great book. Honestly, I can see why this is taught early in age because it's so easily digestible.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything makes sense why the bad is bad and why the good is good, or why things are going wrong. One thing I did want to talk about more, maybe Graham can talk about it a little on his side, but I know in our summary it showed that Mr. Frederick, the other farmer that they were doing trading with, was the representation of Adolf Hitler. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, but it was never brought up. So
Yeah. Let's digest that information. Let's have a little sidebar, and then we can continue.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't fully remember what Mr. Frederick's role was entirely. Um,
I mean, he was one of the farmers, so it's
Here,
basically
Yeah.
I'll read the
was
description
he
on the
one of
link.
the farmers that they were selling to?
So, Mr.
yeah,
Frederick was the tough,
Mhm.
shrewd operator of Pinchfield, a neighboring farm. He was based on Adolf Hitler, the ruler of Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Mr. Frederick proves an untrustworthy neighbor. So, I think the theme throughout the book was that Mr. Jones was, or the pigs rather, were always in cahoots with Mr. Frederick. And
Pilkington.
when,
Or was
well,
it
when they
Pilkington
were,
or Frederick?
well, it was back and forth. That was the whole thing. So,
Right.
when they were in cahoots with Mr. Frederick, he was their ally. Mr. Pilkington was their enemy. And then literally the next day or same day that night at dinner, they'd be like, "No, Mr. Pilkington is our ally. Mr. Frederick is the enemy." You know,
And it's
Right. So
always the
that's
worse for
kind
the
of
worse.
the idea of like Mr. Pilkington represents the capitalist like United States, Great Britain. In terms of like World War II context, I would say like, because the Soviets were originally allies with uh Mr. Frederick. They were originally allied with Adolf Hitler, and then Adolf Hitler decided to invade the Soviet Union, and then they became enemies of Adolf Hitler in Germany. So I think that that's kind of what he's ex- explaining in terms of the pigs, and in terms of they you know support Mr. Pink, uh was it Pilkington?
Yeah, Mr. Pilkington and
Mr.
Frederick.
Pilkington and then Mr. Frederick, and it's kind of back and forth. And I think that's kind of showing how, you know, the Soviet Union itself was also
It's that time
teeter-tottering.
period between World War I and World War II when they were allies with Germany, then allies with the US, right?
Right,
Like that's what
right.
you're
Mhm.
Because
getting at.
before World War II, they were allied with Germany.
Yeah,
And then World War II happened.
they were an
Germany tried
allied
to
power
invade the Soviet Union, and then the Soviet Union declared war on Germany
and became an allied power.
and became an ally. Yeah.
But they were never really like an allied power
Per
as
se.
like accepted. It
No.
was just
Actually, that makes
more
sense.
so like the enemy of our enemy is our friend. Because
Right,
they
exactly.
were also against Germany. We were like, well, we're with them. I
Exactly.
keep doing air quotes. People can't see them.
No, that makes sense because I think Frederick does attack them too, like later on.
Yeah, he
And
helps
that's
Mr.
when
Pilkington to recoup the farm. but
Boxer
the
gets really
settlements-
Boxer gets hurt.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It takes him
Yeah.
forever to recover because he's old.
No. Yeah. No, but that's a good sidebar. I think aside that it's a must read for everyone. I'd love to compare
Yeah.
it to Lord of the Flies. I think it's a good example of like what happens when people gain power or have more knowledge than others. I think Lord of the Flies very much kind of parallels that.
Yeah, good themes, easy to understand because it's again literal children.
No, yeah. Well,
But
I
no,
mean,
I
they're
think
just old books. I think they're made to be easy to understand because that's how people, like,
yeah, back then.
yeah, sent messages. Like, if they didn't have freedom of speech or something, they wrote a book that's like, coded.
Stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But no, that's all I was gonna say for my outtake too is kind of what I said before, but I really enjoyed just the general themes of the book and how he uses certain imagery and certain um aspects of like the farm and the animals and that stuff to portray like major archetypes and themes of like human traits and behaviors and governments and wars and history, and as complicated as you want to take it, it's representative of all of that. And outside of, again, I didn't realize the Russian Revolution, it just reflects a lot of other themes and other stuff. So yeah, if you haven't read it, if we didn't give you enough context or this didn't make any sense to you, definitely go read the real book.
Yeah. It was great use of personification. I
Yes.
just remember that word.
Absolutely.
Love that word, personification.
Personification, that's what it was.
Yeah.
English is my second language.
Yeah, no, I kind of feel the same way. I love the themes in the book and the message that it portrays, in terms of, this idea that everyone looks towards somebody else. The less educated people are looking towards the more educated to kind of help them, but then the more educated people are using that power and that reliance to take advantage of those people. Um and it's a theme that you see throughout every single culture, every single country, and that's just human nature, right? And to put it in animal perspective, it's kind of, it allows you to interpret it in a way where it's not, you're taking the human part out of it. um but it's humans act in that same manner, in that same way, where there is always a group of people that is looking to take advantage of another group of people.
Mm.
And so, and if those people are allowed to, through propaganda, through suppressing the general population, by keeping them illiterate, keeping them docile and unable to actually um, acquire the real information, and only receiving the information that you provide them, um, it allows for that. And this happens in every society everywhere, and that's just human nature. And I think, totalitarianism in itself is what he's trying to speak towards, but I think he's speaking towards a greater issue in itself of just the human aspect of, you know, why these things transpire.
Yeah. Real
Yep.
quick, I was gonna add, I just thought of it while you were explaining that. Like, he literally does that as the book progresses with the pigs. He's like, "Oh, you think I'm talking about pigs? Well, these pigs walk on their feet and wear clothes and read and write. Oh, these pigs are humans." Like, he literally is like, "No, they're people. I'm
Yeah.
not talking about pigs."
Yeah. It's like, oh, they sleep on bed. I thought animals
Yeah,
shouldn't
all of
sleep on
that.
beds. So, oh, it's just beds with sheets. And that was the one thing that got me. It's like, oh yeah, we took off the sheets. We just lie between the blankets. What the? It's-
So it doesn't count.
yeah.
Soaking.
Yeah, I guess they relied on the fact that the animals didn't know the difference between sheets and blankets.
Yeah.
Honestly, because that was a very obvious laugh in your face, haha, I can create
Mhm.
rules whenever I want without being direct about it, right?
Yeah.
And however you want to juxtapose the events that happened in this book, you can attribute it to, like what Hunter said, so many different things in society, and historical context, and what things happen here, and how we relate among a human society. But I think my favorite part about this book is being able to share it with other people and talk about common interest subjects, right? I think that's very important for people to share their perspectives on the same text, right? We all read the same book or listened to the same book, the exact same words, yet we brought four different, you know, views or opinions, or takes on the same material. It's super interesting to hear other people's thoughts because not everybody interprets it the same way. One more point that I'd like to make, or kind of like to just state before we wrap it up here. Um, the reason why books like this hold up so well over time is because the whole book or storyline itself has just happened five times over since then, in different contexts, in different places, with slightly different information. I mean, it's been happening. That's why we see books like this in 1984 written in the dystopian future, air quotes again, as being extremely relatable to today's society.
That was also written in like the 40s.
Yeah, late 40s. This book brought him, national acclaim, worldwide acclaim, and then I think he wrote that following it. That's an even more complex book, but I think it still provides, similar what is it, storyline, outcome, stuff like that. But anyways, I appreciate each and every one of you for listening to this, and I appreciate you three guys for taking the time out of your night to talk about a book that we read personally, for me in 7th grade, Graham in 9th grade, a long time ago. But I think the historical significance is there. Understanding the context really invigorates me about the book, right? It's hard for me to sit here, and do this podcast and talk about all these political movements and things that are happening in today's society and not think that we could do better because of what we've experienced in the past. You're supposed to learn from your mistakes, get up after you fall down and figure out what tripped you, right? And not do that again. So that makes me a little bit disappointed that people are, in mass consuming this type of information, yet in 80 years we haven't done a whole lot about it, right? But we might all just be Benjamins, and
Those are
that
the
might,
real life squealers, all the
yeah,
propaganda.
exactly. So
Well, I think squealers have now just become Instagram and TikTok.
Hmm.
It's a lot harder to avoid and to deny when it's in your face every day.
yep.
It's equally as available content as the books we're talking about, providing the right or real information,
Yeah.
objectively.
Well, I think that in today's society, it's not just Instagram or TikTok. I think you could argue that Squealer in itself kind of encompasses the narrative of me in general in our country, of um, this idea of this, mainstream media. I think the mainstream media in itself, of what we consider that, the big six massive corporations that control most of our media, um, I think you would consider that to be Squealer more so than I think personally. like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of those, they can be forms of what you would call squealer, air quotes, but I think that that's more representative of Benjamin. I think that the outlet of these platforms has allowed for people to express their opinions on certain issues and certain things and be able to relay those thoughts to the masses of people, and then other people can say, you know what, that's a good point, I agree with that, I want to add on to that, or something along those lines, where I feel like it's more positive
Net
than
positive.
negative in a way.
Mhm.
I think there is a lot of negative which comes from social media, but
Yeah.
there is also a lot of positive as well.
I agree, because I think even if it's negative information, the fact that it's out there and people can see it to form their own opinions on it is a net positive.
Right.
That's true.
Even if the information is not true, right? It's up to me, it's up to the person that's viewing it to take that into consideration and consider the fact that this might not be true, right? Not everything that you see, not everything that you're told you should believe.
Well, yeah, I guess you're right, Graham. That is the main difference, that we're, unlike the animals in the farm, we're educated and can form our own opinion and don't have to trust just one old goat to, get form our whole opinions on.
Yeah,
Yep.
we can ask each other and do stuff like this to discuss and talk about, and hopefully in the end make some progress somewhere important.
Absolutely. You just got to remember not to pigeonhole yourself into one of these small niches of alt left, alt right, echo chamber type deal. You got to question things, right? We're humans. We're naturally intuitive. Why do you think our brains doubled in size over the span of what is 100,000 years? Maybe some external factors along with that. We can discuss that on another
Psilocybin
podcast.
mushrooms.
But anyways, yeah, there's a reason why we invent things. We create new technology, right? We're intuitive, we're creative. Why not use that for our own opinions as well?
I agree.
So
Good way to wrap it up.
that's right. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for sticking with us till the end here, and now you can go do something better with your day than listen to us four ramble on about a book that was written 85 years ago. But anyway, make sure to stay up to date. Episodes every Monday at 10:30 a.m. I don't know if I had previously mentioned this in my other podcasts, but yeah, we'll be moving to a Monday release. I think it'll be better for our audience, our viewership. This is among one of two series that we'll be doing. Actually, three, I'm sorry, on the Slanted Attic Experience. There's one yet to be announced. We'll come with that in the near future here. And then we also have the Sports Room and the Slanted Attic Book Club. So make sure to stay up to date on all your social media. You can find us on any of those podcast platforms. We're mostly on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, but you can find us on the smaller sources as well. At Slanted Attic for all of our social media. And thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next one. See you guys.
Peace out. Thanks, y'all.
Peace.
See you.